for a while. Thanks again our guest in the morning. I think we'll stay the whole day, so please continue. Our guest today doesn't need introduction, in fact, because otherwise he wouldn't be here. So we all know who he is, Dr. Daniel Pipes, the founding director of the Middle East Forum in Philadelphia. We'll be talking about the need and how Israel can and should defeat the Palestinians as a prerequisite to peace. I mean, many times in Israel over the past years we've heard the slogan, let the IDF win, but they don't speak about the wider picture beyond the military defeat, if possible, of the Palestinians. And to be frank, for quite some time we haven't had one. I don't know when was the last time that Israel won the such a defeat, but obviously what Dr. Pipes is going to talk about is broader than this, and we'll address the question in its broader term. One request, don't ask questions during the speech, let him speak uninterrupted, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. I'll distribute as well this list if you want to be added to Dr. Pipes' mailing list, or add your email address and then we'll add you to the list. So Dr. Pipes,
thank you. I will speak fairly briefly so there'll be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. I'm a historian, and as a historian I've noticed that wars end when one side gives up. It's actually quite intuitive. So long as you and I are each ready to fight the other, the fight goes on. I give up, you win, the fight's over. There are many examples of this through history. One particularly obvious one is World War I and World War II. The Germans lost in World War I, but their cities were standing, their armies were still effective, and so they didn't believe they really lost, and so they tried again. And the second time they tried, the Allies realized they had to convince them that they had lost, and it worked. And no one in Germany or Japan or Italy or elsewhere has said, let's go and try a third time. So with that in mind as background, I've been watching since 1999 the Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy and its problems. And I concluded that there are two different ways of seeing this conflict. There's the conventional one, the one that has been in place since 25 years ago in the Oslo Accords, presumably will still be in place again when the Trump plan is revealed, which basically tries to please the Palestinians. It is essentially appeasement. It is essentially saying, here Palestinians, take this and leave Israel alone. It hasn't worked, clearly. And more efforts to make it happen will not work, just as the Kerry effort did not work a few years ago, so the next effort will not work. And that's because of something deep, which is what I call Palestinian rejectionism, which goes back close to a century, can be most easily dated to the appointment of Haj Amin al-Husseini in 1921. The rejectionism was far more severe then than today, but it's still there. An unwillingness to accept Zionism, the Yeshua, the State of Israel. No, no, no. Now, during this century, I would argue that roughly 20% of the people we now call Palestinians have accepted Israel, Yeshua, Zionism, and been willing to deal with it. But the large majority has not been willing to do so. And if present trends continue, they will still not be willing to accept Israel. So something new is needed. As I said, for almost 20 years, I've been brooding on this topic, and I've come up with the idea of Israel victory, which is to convince the Palestinians that they have lost, that there is no hope. They are a miniature version of Germany, Japan, Italy, and other defeated states in 1945. That they must recognize the Jewish state in order for progress to take place. I see the Palestinians a little like Hiro Onoda. Anybody know who Hiro Onoda was? He was the Japanese soldier who continued to fight until 1974. And it seems like a bit of a joke, but it wasn't. He was on a Philippine island for 29 years, from 1945 to 1974. He was destroying property, stealing property, and killing people. Perhaps one person a year. It was not funny, it was serious. And finally his superior officer was brought to the island and told him, lay down your arms, the emperor tells you to end the war, and he did. But the Palestinians are a little bit like that. It is clear, it's almost the same amount of time, that they acknowledged defeat in 1993 on the White House lawn. They acknowledged that they couldn't win, and yet they continue on and on. Now why do they do so? They do so, I think, for three reasons. One is Islamic doctrine, the notion of a waqf, the notion of a territory that is once Muslim controlled must always be Muslim controlled. And this is a powerful idea that gives spirit to the notion of suluk, of steadfastness. Inevitably, this territory, and this is not just any territory, but a holy territory, will return to Muslim rule. Secondly, the Palestinians are enthused by the fact that they have worldwide support, unique worldwide support. This is not some obscure African liberation front that no one's heard of. This is the cause that gets more resolutions in the General Assembly of the United Nations than the rest of the world combined. In, I think, the past decade, there were 68 resolutions concerning Israel and 67 about the rest of the world. In departments of universities, on the streets of major cities, the Palestinians have a support that is unique in the world. That's two. So first is the doctrine, Islamic doctrine. Second is international support. And third, I would argue, perhaps more controversially, is Israeli policy. Israeli policy towards the Palestinians over the past decades, say since 1993, has been timid, soft, cautious, defensive, and has led the Palestinians to think that they are winning. Israeli policy, the security establishment, the IDF, Mossad, Shin Bet, police, border police, and so forth, have treated the Palestinians in a very cautious way, fearful of another intifada, fearful of the Palestinian Authority collapsing, fearful of having to take over and supply food, medicine, water, energy, security. And so the security services have been very, very cautious. This is the third reason I think the Palestinians have a sense of optimism, that no matter how bad things look today, in fact, they will eventually win. It is that spirit, just as Hiro Onoda thought on his Filipino island for 29 years that he was part of the imperial force that eventually would win. It is that misguided spirit that needs to be broken. The Israeli government, I believe, should seek victory over the Palestinians. The Palestinians need to be defeated. Now these are words that are not normally used in modern discourse, modern Western discourse. We do not talk of victory and defeat. Palestinians do. In Syria they do, in Libya they do, in Yemen they do, but not in Israel, not in the West, more broadly. The word has disappeared. I have a search engine. I put in the words Israel victory into the new search engine. And it's quite amusing because it either is 1967 or it is Eurovision. Those are the Israelis. Nothing in the past 70 years except or 50 years since a song. And I think this points to the disappearance of this notion of victory. And yet, again, as a historian, the If you look at the history of warfare, going back millennia, it's always been about victory. If you go to Sun Tzu, if you go to Clausewitz, if you go to Douglas MacArthur, you will see they all talk about victory. There's no doubt that victory is the goal. Wars end when one side gives up. It doesn't matter what the weapons are. Victory is defined as imposing your will on the enemy so the enemy no longer tries to achieve his war aims. I personally lived through such a defeat on May 1st, 1975, when the United States lost in Vietnam. It was a complete defeat. We did not run out of dollars, we did not run out of bullets, we did not run out of manpower. We ran out of will, and we lost. And no one in the United States has since, in the 43 years that followed, said, let's try it again. Let's go back. It's over. We lost. So I've had a personal experience of defeat. Now, the timidness on the part of the Israeli security services has meant, time and again, the Israeli response to Palestinians has been weak. We saw this just 2 weeks ago. 469 missiles and rockets, and yet it cost nothing to Hamas. The ceasefire was agreed upon. Same thing with the kites and the balloons earlier this year. Same thing a year and a bit ago with the Temple Mount murders. Again and again, while the public and the politicians want to do something, in general, the security service says no, don't do this. I would say that is the number one obstacle to an Israeli victory. The security services, to my surprise, when I started looking at this topic, I thought it would be Meretz and the left. No, they don't really count. It's the security service who is so important and so reluctant to take any step that will signal to the Palestinians that there's a price to pay. It is unimaginable that the security services would agree that when a missile comes over from Gaza or Lebanon, any other action, or hostile action, that some retribution take place, that the water, the food, the energy, the medicine, something be cut off. It's unheard of. So the situation goes on and on. The Palestinians have this optimism, and the Israeli security establishment has this pessimism, and nothing basically. And the outside world believes that more talks will solve the problem. So what I and my organization are proposing is a shift. A shift that starts here, where Israelis seek victory, and then moves to the United States, where the American government, the American president says, yes, that's what we do. We win our wars through victory. You do the same. And finally goes to the Palestinians, who are forced to understand that the war is over and they lost. Now, there are a couple of interesting implications of this approach. The first is that we are solution agnostic. We are not in favor of one state, two state, three states. We're not calling for sovereignty in the West Bank. We're not, I see a number of friends here, we're not advocating the humanitarian paradigm, or the Emirates, or the Jordanist Palestine, or the New State solution. All of them are fine. Well, not the one-state solution, but the others are fine. Not Jordanist Palestine, but the others are fine. Not really a New State solution either. But anyway, some of them are fine. We're not advocating any of those, but we're saying that whatever your goal is, whatever your plan is, it's a good idea to have the Palestinians accept Israel. That would be helpful, no matter what your specific plan is. And by the way, it's helpful for the left as well. It means, in leftist terms, ending the occupation. It means not having to have guards and walls and borders and all that they are so upset about. So it should be something that is attractive to both left and right, because we're not saying that the final resolution is X, Y, or Z. We're saying that's up to you. All we want is for the Palestinians finally, after a century, to come to terms with Israel. We welcome everyone to join this effort, but we ourselves do not take position on borders, resources, sanctities, and so we remain neutral. So we had a big dispute 2 weeks ago between the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister. We stay out of it. The Education Minister, we stay out of it. We're glad that victory is being discussed, but we don't take a side in it. The second point is that Palestinians gain yet more than Israelis. Think about it. Israel's a flourishing country. You live here, you know that. I could cite you all sorts of statistics, but happiness surveys, water, demographics, extraordinary rise in the Israeli birth rate, culture, rule of law, and so forth. Standard of living. Palestinians, need one say more, do not benefit from all those attractive qualities that Israel has. Only by giving up their historic, irredentist claim to this entire territory, only when they recognize excuse me, the Jewish state of Israel, can they begin to develop their own polity, economy, society, and culture. So long as they are focused on the negative goal of eliminating the Jewish state, they will remain oppressed, backward, and poor. The only way forward for them is to acknowledge the permanence of the Jewish state of Israel. And the interesting thing is that this seems to be in the air, not among Palestinians so much as among other Arabic-speaking and some non-Arabic-speaking Muslims. As I like to put it, Israel now has better relations with Saudi Arabia than with Sweden, better relations with Egypt than with Spain, possibility of diplomatic relations with Bahrain, President of Chad, Azerbaijan. Things are changing on the Muslim side. The flip side of that, I might add, is that the left is becoming ever more hostile to Israel. So you have Mohammed bin Salman on the one hand, as a representative of the new Arab thinking, and you have Jeremy Corbyn on the other hand, as representative of the new British thinking. Not everything is going in Israel's favor, but there is an atmosphere of openness to Israel that has not existed in the past. So the deflation of Palestinian ambitions is necessary for them to build their own polity, economy, society, culture, to cultivate their own garden, to build something worthy of a skilled and dignified people. So long as they have this notion that they can win, that they can destroy, eliminate the Jewish state, there will be no progress. And as we saw, the past 25 years have not helped. Indeed, things are worse. What is euphemistically called the peace process should more accurately be called the war process. Things were better in 30 years ago, 25 years ago, than they are today in the Palestinian polity. There is more aggression, more hostility, more arms than there were back then. So to conclude, our work is threefold. First, to convince Israelis that the only way to end a war is through victory. The second is to convince the U.S. government to endorse an Israeli victory. And the third is to convince the Palestinians that it's over. The war is over, they lost, time to move on. Towards this end, we have undertaken both intellectual and political goals. On the political level, it's easy to point to the fact that we have 26 members of the Knesset who have joined the Israel Victory Caucus. We have 32 members of the current House. We'll go down in January, but now it's 32 who have joined the Israel Victory Caucus there. We've spoken to many leading politicians. And then on the intellectual level, well, here I am talking to you. We are engaged in writing, in commissioning studies, We have a team in Israel that is headed by Danny Seaman, who is where?
Here.
Okay.
All the way at the back.
Over in yeah, there it's way in the back of the door. A team of 5 that is working on the subject. We have a team of 2 in Washington, and we're trying to get this out as a subject to be debated. The basic idea is very simple. Israel wins, the Palestinians lose, as the title of this talk goes. But the implications are very large and very contrary to the assumptions of conciliation, mediation, compromise, goodwill, and so forth. It is sometimes difficult to talk about victory and defeat, but yet there is no avoiding it. That's how wars end, through victory and defeat. International wars end through victory and defeat. There is no avoiding it. And what one finds is many efforts to avoid it, to finesse it, to find some way of reaching an agreement, of having other forces come in, of leasing, of splitting, but they won't work. So long as the Palestinians believe, and they do believe this, 80% believe that they can eliminate the Jewish state of Israel, it won't come to an end. Now, the good news is that 20% of Palestinians do accept, historically and today. So the goal must be to increase that number from 20% to 40% to 60%, to convince the Palestinian people and their leadership that the path that they are now taking is futile. It's not going to go anywhere. The only way for them out to prove their wrongs is to admit defeat, to acknowledge that this century-long conflict has come to an end. The emperor has signed the Japanese government has signed the acknowledgement of defeat. The war is over. Time to rebuild.
To what extent
Introduce yourself. So we don't
Sorry?
Introduce yourself.
Oh, myself, Barry Werner, and I'm not a professional, I'm just here to listen. Okay. An Israeli citizen transplanted from the United States. Okay. So, do you think that the Palestinians, and okay, let's leave it at the Palestinians, are not giving up because they think they have power in Europe and the United States through public opinion, in which they have an ability to manage? So, is there ability to manage a public opinion in the West through Muslim Brotherhood or Hezbollah or other kinds of agencies, PLO office or whatever? Is that something that gives them a sense of security that the war is not over because they still have an option?
Well, yes, that was the second of my 3 explanations for why there is an optimism. And I'd go beyond the West. I was struck some months ago seeing a picture of an Indian farmers union in some town in India with a banner stretching across the street that was anti-Israel. The left around the world, Indian villages, it's a union of 15 million members, by the way, in Japan, in Brazil, is anti-Israel, increasingly anti-Israel, and increasingly the right. Again, I mentioned Brazil. Look what happened. The new president-elect is saying his first trip will be here. It has become bifurcated, and a substantial part of the world is hostile to Israel and friendly to the Palestinians. And that is a very important source of succor for them. That is one of the 3 main reasons why they continue to be optimistic that they can prevail. Yeah, very important.
What's the problem?
I tend to disagree with you, but in a different manner. I believe actually there is something shared between the left and the right. both sides believe that if their solution is adopted, then there will be peace. The right say, let us defeat them, then there will be peace. The left say, let us be defeated, and then there will be peace. And they are trying to accomplish this. But both sides tend to ignore third possibility that peace is unattainable. Namely, for example, I have a PhD student who sees himself as a Palestinian, officially is an Israeli Arab, and he's doing exactly on this topic a PhD dissertation: is peace attainable between Israelis and Palestinians? And since he is a Palestinian, he has free access to all the higher echelons within the Palestinian authority, except for Abu Mazen himself. And I don't know from where did you take your 20%. None of them is interested in peace, because for them, 67 is no issue. Only 48 is an issue. Now, the examples that you brought, Germany, Vietnam, it's irrelevant. Because here you have a people who lost their land, and they believe that the Israelis robbed their land, 48, not 67, and they're willing to continue the struggle until they get their land back. Now, they can have a very good example from us. We were utterly defeated 2,000 years ago, and here we are back. So, from their point of view, they are going to continue the fight. So my point is that it seems to me that both blocks, either the right or the left, are ignoring probably what is going to happen. That peace is unattainable.
That is a distinct point of view, that the Palestinians are different. What I call the Palestinians as Superman theory. That, yeah, Germans could be defeated, Japanese could be defeated, but Palestinians cannot be defeated. They have a smooth, they have a resilience, a tenacity that is superhuman. I don't agree. In fact, I would point to, say, the period 2001 to 2003, when within very constrained limitations, Ariel Sharon did try and do something along these lines. And if you look at what the Palestinians were saying, doing at the time, they were miserable. They had a sense that they were losing. Now, it stopped when Sharon turned to the retreat from the withdrawal from Gaza, but that for 2 years it was a powerful signal coming from the West Bank and Gaza that this, we can't go on with this. So I acknowledge your points that certainly the leadership is not 80%, it's 100% for sure. I acknowledge the point that there's Islamic doctrine. I acknowledge points you haven't made, that there are neighbors who are supporting this. There's an international support for it. I acknowledge all that, but I do not think Palestinians are Superman. Palestinians have no economy, have no military. They are losing support among the Arab Muslim world. To be sure, not entirely. Iran and Turkey are now engaged in a way they used not to be. But they have lost the support of governments. Virtually every Arab government is uninterested, wants to finish with this. I think they can be defeated. Well, the only way to try, the only way to find out is to try. I mean, it's worth the try. At worst, you're right and I'm wrong, and nothing is lost. But at best, I'm right and you are wrong. And we have an Israel that's at peace and Palestinians who are doing good things. It's worth a try.
David Levy, PhD candidate. In the case of the Japanese and the Germans and even the American South, the Confederacy, okay, they were unconditional surrenders, but after a period of time, the occupiers left and they became independent nation states again with self-governance. I don't think you're proposing that that's what the Palestinians would agree to. If that were the case, they would probably be happy with signing some document today, knowing that 10 years from now they would be an independent nation state like Germany and Japan. But you're suggesting, I think, that they recognize surrender, and then what? Palestinians become Israelis? And what's the next step?
Then what is what I specifically have not said. I said that we are solution agnostic. If you want a two-state solution, Sherman does not want this two-state solution. We're going back and forth. Fine. We can both agree that this is a good idea. I myself personally do believe in a two-state solution. Not now, not 10 years from now. A very far distant two-state solution. And the Palestinians have truly shown over a protracted period that when they're upset, they send a strong letter to the other. They are not engaged in violence and they're not engaged in delegitimization. After this has been established for a long period, then yeah, I can see a two-state solution. But it's a very remote potential. But yeah, if they behave, if they stop making war, then yes, I should see no reason why not. Again, very remote, full of conditions, cautions. But that's not part of the program. The program is convince them Israel's permanent, tough, got friends, strong, time to give up, and then you bring in your ideas what should be next.
Well, isn't the Six-Day War an example of a victory? I can't think of a bigger victory than the Six-Day War. And it didn't convince the Palestinians to give up. In fact, and there's a difference between Germany, Italy, and Japan. These were countries. You can defeat a country, but the Palestinians, it's not an army or a country that you can defeat them. They go home. That's what happened in Vietnam. It wasn't clear who America was fighting, so they left. And I've heard that the Arabs have this image, yeah, it looks terrible, but the Crusaders, they thought they were here 200 years and we got rid of them. So the Israelis are here 100 years, give us another 100 years and we'll come out.
Well, the 67 war was obviously an astonishing victory. I think the greatest victory, military victory in the annals of history. But as you point out, it was against states, and I would argue, as Hillel Frisch did in a piece for BESA this morning, that 4 defeats in 48, 49, 56, 67, and 73 left the Arab states understanding they had lost, and with the exception of the Syrians in 82, they've been out of it ever since. When you think about it, the Arab state engagement against Zionism and Israel began, I would say, in 1931 with the Hajj conferences, and lasted to 73, or 74 with the death of Hajj Amin Husseini, so 42, 43 years. Well, it's 45 years since 1973. It's a long time since the Arab states have been actively engaged. There is virtually no constituency in the Arab states for war with Israel. It's over. Now, they haven't signed a peace treaty, but they have, and they're still voluble against Israel. But in fact, in many ways, it's over. Now, the Palestinians, as you correctly point out, are not a state. You say that makes it more difficult to defeat them. I say it makes it easier. The fact that they have no military, they have no economy. All they have are protesters in the streets of Europe and resolutions from the General Assembly. That's not going to get them very far. So I think should the Israeli polity decide that convincing the Palestinians is its goal, it will be rather easy to do. The Palestinians have nothing with which to stop them. They are weak.
What about European? Why the Israeli government is having in the last years elegant and humanistic wars against the Palestinians, trying to avoid conflicts, trying to, unfortunately, it happens to kill soldiers. What is the idea behind that? Could you explain that?
Well, as I suggested before, the security services are reluctant to punish, confront the Palestinians. We just saw it with the 469. Because, well, I mean, in this case, there could be other factors, such as Syria, such as not wanting to have trouble at a time of good relations with Bahrain and so forth. There could be other factors. But in general, the reason is a great reluctance to, one, a great reluctance to go in and take control again. And two, a sense that the Palestinians cannot learn that punishment reprisals, and so forth, will not succeed. The Palestinians are supermen who are programmed to fight Israel, and nothing can stop them. I believe they're humans, and they will learn like other humans.
But did Israel thinks that they are superhumans?
Just heard. You just
I
heard.
don't know.
Professor Talbot say
do
that
we
they're
think like
superhumans.
that?
You just heard it.
I also believe in your ways that victory needed to be done in order to survive, but there is no peace in the end of the road.
That's what I call Superman. No matter what you do, they will persist in wanting to eliminate the Jewish state.
That's the way they exist.
That's the way they have existed. Doesn't mean they have to exist in the future.
Was it Robin?
It's always good to learn from history and examples of crushing the feet. Germany and Japan in the Second World War is interesting example. But there is another parallel to draw your attention that there is another ethnic, not controversy, but conflict going on in the Middle East about 100 years, like Zion, and it doesn't die down. And that's a Kurdish problem. The Kurds are fighting since 1980 for establishing an independent state. They have been crushingly defeated again and again and again and again. Saddam Hussein ground them to dust and even used poison gases against them. The Turks defeated them again and again and again. The Iranians are fighting them now. There is resistance going on in Iran, Kurdish resistance. In Iraq, they let them have some autonomy, but very under a situation where great inferiority. Once they set up, try to be independent, remember a few months ago, the Iraqi army, incapable as it is, just walked in and took off after the territory. And still they refuse to give up. What would make the Kurds give up their status? What kind of defeat? What should the Iraqis do that they didn't do up to now, the Iranians do that they didn't do up to now, or the Turks do that they didn't do up to now?
Let me note that until the 30th parallel in 1991, the Kurds were, as you pointed out correctly, brutalized, attacked, and so forth. There was no other option. No other option. Palestinians have had another option since 1948, 1947, or whatever date you pick. They've always had the option of living side by side with Israel. They have refused it. They've refused it. The Kurds never had that option. That option is always there. They're refusing now to talk to the American government. They're refusing this. They're now angry at the Emiratis. They're refusing. But should they stop refusing, they have an option the Kurds have not had. Now, since 1991 in northern Iraq, they have an option. But elsewhere, as you point out, in Iran, Turkey, and Syria, there is no option. No one's saying to them, if you do this, then you get your own autonomy, maybe leading to a state. So, you're right to point out that the Palestinian defeat is predicated in part on the fact that there is an option. They can go a different route.
Without referring to the Palestinian issue, the Kurds, for example, in 75 were crushed. After the Shah, the Iranian Shah betrayed them, they were crushed. They didn't seek any independence. If the international circumstances wouldn't have changed, the Kurds wouldn't have risen again.
But they didn't give up.
They gave up in the sense that they didn't have anything to do. The point is that Saddam Hussein went to Kuwait, America went to Iraq, new circumstances came and they defended the Kurds and they revived their hopes. Again, I'm not making a comparison because every situation may be different or may not. But the Kurds is not necessarily the good example, Martin.
As you know, Daniel, I've been a strong supporter of your initiative since the beginning. And but I would like to challenge you on certain points. If you want to take it beyond generic declarations of good intent to something operational, I think you're going to, because I understand your wish to be solution agnostic in America. But I think if you're going to operationalize that in Israel, you're going to at least have your Israeli chapter be less agnostic. Because at some stage, what are you going to inflict on the Palestinians to convince them that they've lost and we've won? And just to sort of give you a rule of thumb, in a war of independence, Israel lost 1% of its population. For you to inflict, and they didn't give up. If you're going to inflict the same losses on the Palestinians, that's tens of thousands of them being killed. And is this something sustainable? I mean, I have other solutions for that, as you know, but what do you have to inflict on the Palestinians for them to acknowledge that they've been defeated in the long run, not just to accept a two-state solution as a two-stage approach? Because although it's true that much of the support in the Muslim world has been eroded, there's still very serious pockets of support which distinguish defeat in the Middle East from defeat in Germany and in Japan, because Germany wasn't surrounded by a swathe of Teutonic nations, and Japan wasn't surrounded by a swathe of Nipponic nations that we keep sending in, which is, by the way, the miscalculation of America in Afghanistan and Iraq, that we keep sending in insurgents to undermine any so-called victory arrangement. So I'd like to challenge you a little bit, at least in the Israeli side, that victory can't be all things to everybody. And there has to be some kind of handle on what you have to do to bring the Palestinians to their knees. And by the way, there is an example, Tamil Tigers. In Sri Lanka, the Tamil Tigers were ultimately completely defeated, but what was inflicted on them?
The Tamil Tigers were defeated through enormous brutality. No, I have not. I've defined defeat as giving up on your war goals. I have not explained the tactics of how to achieve it. I have not explained it in part because I'm an American analyst of foreign affairs, not an Israeli colonel. I have not explained it because it's premature. Who knows what the circumstances will be should this policy be adopted at some time in the future. And I've not gone into tactical details because I think it's difficult now for me to say what will be opportune at a future time. Well, those are the same points. But it's clear what the sort of steps are. When there are hostilities, be they military or political, trying to get the Israeli team thrown out of the international soccer, the football league is a hostility. Then I would like to see the Israeli government take some steps which inflict pain. There's a punishment for doing this. I am not calling for a massacre. I'm not calling for necessarily military means, precisely because the Palestinians have no military. They have a police force of some sort. These steps can be taken, gauged, learned from. Israel has all the levers at its disposal. It can do what it wants. Now, to which the common response is, but there will be howls of protest around the world. To which I say, and there aren't already howls of protest around the world? And indeed, if you look at the historical record, Israel tends to do well when it's strong. Entebbe had a much better response than the unilateral withdrawal from Lebanon. Israel weak.
Six-day war better than Yom Kippur War. Six-day war had better response to Yom Kippur War.
Exactly. So, yes, there will be costs, no doubt, but Israel's paying the price anyway, even when it doesn't undertake these forms of punishment and retribution. So maybe those costs will go up a bit, but the goal of convincing Palestinians they've lost seems to be so important that it's worth taking that risk.
Hey, my name is Lev. I'm a PhD student here in the department. and I want to actually disagree with you on one key issue. You noted that the Palestinians have no economy and have no military force. I strongly disagree, since the Palestinians have Hamas, they have Hezbollah, they have Iranian and Qatari money and funds, so they actually do have military and funds and economy.
I would not call Hezbollah a Palestinian force. I would not call the Iranians yes, they support the Palestinians, but they have their own interests. They exploit and use the Palestinians for their purposes. Hamas is a military force. Azamuddin Qassam brigades are a force, but I don't think that's a serious military force. So we disagree in our assessment of Hezbollah and the Iranians behind it. They cooperate with the Palestinians, but they have their own goals, which are quite distinct and much larger than the Palestinian goals.
David Elazar, tired and enjoying. I assume you were brought up on Uncle Remus stories. You know who Uncle Remus was? Brer Rabbit, Brer Bear, Brer Fox. When Brer Rabbit and Brer Bear and Brer Fox caught Brer Rabbit, what did he say? He said, "Do not throw me into the briar patch. You can do anything you want, but don't throw me into the briar patch." So what did they do? They threw him into the briar patch. That's his home. So everybody has a different concept of what is punishment. Now, the West has to figure out, we're the West, what is punishment to a Palestinian? Perhaps it's not the same thing as punishment to a Westerner. Just like Brer Rabbit wanted the briar patch. To the bear and to the fox, that's punishment. How do we find what is punishment in a non-Western concept?
You're providing another reason why I'm reluctant to go into tactical details. I don't have that experience. I have not been in the IDF. I have not studied this issue. I don't know. But I'm sure there are plenty of people in this country who could answer that question. And I would hope they'd be asked that question. What would be the most effective ways to convince the Palestinians that the battle is over, they have lost, it's time to move on? Good question.
That the Western world would see us as being bad.
Yes,
Well,
the West will.
Okay, so what? So
But I specifically included the United States. I made efforts elsewhere, particularly in Australia, Canada, less so in Europe, to see if there's any kind of support for this. There wasn't. But I believe that so long as the U.S. government, Congress behind it, is supportive, then Israel can pretty much ignore what the rest of the world says. Yeah, there'll be costs, to be sure. But I think those are costs that Israel can afford to pay. But your point is correct. I'm not in a position to answer your question.
Abraham, me?
Yeah.
Abraham Fisher. I think that what is happening with the Israeli government, first of all, bringing 30,000 serial killers, in 1993 with their family. But what happened with Israel since these 25 years is that we treat the Palestinians, well, they are no Palestinian, but never mind, that we treat them as the children who are not responsible for their act. We had a minister by the name Fuad, was a minister of energy, Zichrono Livracha. And when they were bombing the station, the electric station in Ashkelon, he asked a question. How come we send them electricity and they bomb ours? What does it mean? It means that you treat them as a children because they voted for the Hamas. It's not that we forced them to vote in Hamas. For instance, Britain bombed Germany. They didn't say, oh, there are children here, they are dead. They voted for Nazism. They're responsible for that. And we don't. And this Israeli government continue with this idea, with humanitarian. And the army are telling us now that families who are, coming for a cancer operation, they are sending ammunition into. But this happened all the time. And then we had to learn from Trump, who said that he's not going to send the money to the Palestinians because they are paying for the terrorists. Then the Israeli government said, we are going to do that as well. And then they put it on that, saying, no, it depends on the Israeli government. So what we have, in a nutshell, we Israelis, not we, the Israeli government, treat the Palestinians as children who are not responsible for their act. But when, in the 50s and the 60s, when I lived here, we had what we call Pulat Tagmul. We had a special unit, 101, that whenever there was something, we'd send them in. So there was not that a question, oh, they are so, and that's the problem. Till this is not going to change in their mind, that they are responsible for their act. Even during Rabin, when there was act, what Rabin said, we'll fight against them as there is no terrorism, and we'll continue the peace treaty. So what it means that there's nothing. They can do whatever they want. So it's not that you are telling us that we don't defeat them. We don't want to defeat them. We want to remain in that situation. And that's the Israeli government saying us they are too weak. And let's continue.
You're agreeing with my third point about the timidity of the Israeli defense establishment. And there's some colorful examples. You gave one or two. Let me give my favorite, which is, I think, in the 2014 conflict. Israeli electricity going to Gaza was cut off when a rocket destroyed a station. And so Israeli electricians went out undercover to fix that together, to send free electricity again to Gaza. That was my favorite. I thought that was astonishing. But yes, we agree. You quoted Rabin. Let me quote another statement by Rabin. He said many times in 1993, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your enemies. Profoundly wrong. What he should have said is, you don't make peace with your friends, you make peace with your former enemies, your enemies who've been defeated, who come to the table asking for benefits, who have no longer trying to murder you. But he didn't do that. There was no defeat of the Palestinians in 1993 or in 2018.
Okay, we have to keep in mind.
Okay. What's wrong with just waiting? We can wait a very long time.
Yeah, good question. What's wrong with just waiting? Well, my two-word answer is Jeremy Corbyn. So long as this
I don't understand.
West Bank,
how is that an answer?
Explain it. So long as this West Bank, mind you, it's not Palestinians around the world. It's not the ones in Syria or Jordan or Brazil. It's the one, and not in Israel. It's the ones in the West Bank and Gaza, just those. So long as the situation festers, so long as it's not resolved in some way that generally there's a contentment with, their hostility towards Israel finds repercussions around the world that I think are very dangerous. I mentioned before that the left has become hostile, is becoming more and more hostile. I cited examples in India, I could cite many others. This wasn't always the case, but it's becoming ever more the case. For example, in the United States, it's very clear on the Democratic side that the older Democrats are friendly to Israel, and the younger ones are hostile. And if you take the youth as a whole, it's more favorable to the Palestinians than to Israel. The elder you go, the more favorable to Israel. The younger you go, the more disfavorable to Israel. I wouldn't exactly say favorable to the Palestinians. They don't like Israel. The Palestinians are their vehicle to show they don't like Israel. It's already bad, and it's going to get worse. And should there be no resolution, it will get worse and worse.
That's why I should wait. So what?
If I was a Palestinian, I would
wait.
Okay.
That's what they are doing.
But
According to the Quran.
The Palestinians have reason to wait. They have vast international support. Israel has no reason to wait. The question was, why should Israel wait? Israel should do something. I think the next Democrat in the White House in Washington will make Obama look, in comparison, very friendly to Israel. He was not that unfriendly. He had his coolness and his reservations, but he was not that unfriendly. I can see some of those left-wing Democrats being truly unfriendly. And then the world will change for Israel. So there is an urgency to do so. So I mentioned Jeremy Corbyn because he's actually there, but I'm actually more thinking of an American president, unnamed, unknown, on the left. He won't be as bad as Jeremy Corbyn. He will not be friends with Hamas, but will be making significant change in Israel's place in the much to the detriment of Israel.
Okay, about the concept, I'm Nelly. About the concept of victory, which is, I think, not only outdated, but also alien in the Middle East. You as an American, you experience ultimate victory over Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Very photogenic, very impressive, very historic, dramatic, and now the results are that you, America, compete with Iran over who will be more influenced in Iran, who will control Iran. So the result of this victory are very controversial. So I don't believe the concept of victory over Palestinians, and it's also Israel is in terms of military power. Israel is a regional power. And you speak about the tribe, Palestinians, maybe fake identity, PR identity of invented by European Union and promoted by this. And it's not I don't know what victory you mean. Conceptual victory, military victory, ideological victory, psychological victory, whatever.
Well, thank you for elaborating all the different mechanisms to get to victory. Victory is eternal. The arms change, the uniforms change, but the idea that war ends, or any conflict, and I had to hear a conflict with Ryan for a moment, it will only end when one side gives up. It's the way the world works.
You got it.
It is not
Saddam
antiquated.
Hussein.
It is not antiquated. We'll get to that point. It is not antiquated. It is timeless. And it has many components, as you just listed. Economic, psychological, and so forth. But the definition is very simple. You give up on your war goals. It's everywhere. It's not Western, it's not Eastern, it's universal. As far as the United States in Iraq, yes, it was badly done. There was no victory. There was a pulling down of the statue and execution of Saddam Hussein. That was not a victory any more than the 67 war was a victory. A victory comes when the Iraqis see themselves as defeated. But we weren't fighting the Iraqis. We were fighting the Iraqi regime. There was no attempt to instill among Iraqis a sense of defeat. Maybe there should have been, maybe not. But there was no effort to do so. It was called Operation Iraqi Freedom. It was about freeing the Iraqis. Make the point that it didn't do a very good job of it, fair enough. But the goal was to get rid of Saddam Hussein. And in that sense, it succeeded. There was no war between the United States and Iran. There was a limited war between the U.S. government and the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government was destroyed as the Afghan government was 2 years earlier, in 2001. These are very limited undertakings. This is not a major conflict. But I would stress victory and defeat are permanent conditions of human politics. They're not going away.
Okay, two more questions.
I'm Abraham Karmeli. You said you said about 26 or 36 Knesset members have joined your ideas and support you. Why so little? Why not 50 or 60? If you can elaborate about that, who they are, who is not.
Well, that's one perspective. If you take away the Arabs, that's the joint list, that's 106. So it's 26 out of 106, 1 out of 4. I thought that's pretty good, actually. If you'd asked me beforehand, how many would you have? I'd say 2, 3, 4. It's a very radical idea. It is not what is being discussed. I might add that the representatives in this caucus come from 7 parties in Parliament, all but the Joint List, 1 Haredi party, and Meretz. All the other 7 have, they're not officially
Meretz,
joined.
you said?
All but
But
Meretz and Jones. Representatives of 7 other parties are in this. I'm impressed by it. I'm sorry you're not.
This is relative. Yeah, okay, this lady, last question.
Yes. I was wondering, what do you think, how you could make the Palestinians give up? Because I think it's a different mentality, and they believe in violence. They've been raised that way. That pride is more important than life, and we are constantly supporting them, giving them, supporting them with the food, electricity, and everything. And I think there's a contradiction. And on one side, we're helping them, so why should they give up? And on the other side, also, I was wondering, you didn't say anything about Hamas. Do they really have? Do they really have something to say? I mean, aren't they suppressed by Hamas? Can most of them really, do anything? I mean, and.
Well, I certainly agree that the Israeli policy has been contradictory. Sending them benefits is not causing them to sense that they've lost. As for Hamas, there's been some interesting polling done by the Washington Institute for Near East Policy lately. It shows, you may not know this, that the level of hostility in the West Bank is greater than in Gaza. It appears that the 3 successive rounds of conflict with Gaza have left Gazans not wanting, not eager for another, whereas the West Bankers are ready for a fight. So it appears that they have learned a lesson. It wasn't the kind of consistency that I would look for, but there was an educational process underway in Gaza over the past decade. And Hillel Frisch called for a 4th round, saying that this is what's necessary to convince them that they can win. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's a 5th, a 6th, and maybe it's not military. Maybe it's psychological, it's economic, it's diplomatic. I don't know. I don't have the answers for the tactics. But evidence does suggest that the Gazan population has learned something from these 3 rounds of hostilities.
Sorry, I also wonder why we don't hit their infrastructure, before they hit us. I mean, why do we wait for 400 rockets and then hit their infrastructure? And we don't prevent those kind of things because there could have been a lot of dead people. And I don't think the way the government is acting is doing the right thing, because we're dealing with people who really just are more than happy that the most important thing for them is just to kill as many Jews as possible. And
yes, well, clearly the government's response this last time would have been different had the bomb that hit the bus killed 60 soldiers. Presumably it would be very different today. But fortunately it didn't, and so that ended without any reprisals. But yes, you're right. I agree. You citizens should be saying to your government, to your security forces, don't let them assault us. Don't let them attack us, and pay no price for it. It was months and months with those kites and balloons. And there was this famous interchange between Bennett and Eisenhower. Bennett said, why don't you do something? Eisenhower said, it's against my morality. This is not normal talk by a chief of staff. But that's up to you to convince your government to, and it looks like, judging by the last couple of weeks, the government is beginning to talk about this. It's a long way. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.